Thus, it was about 3 days ago that I, an 18-year-old girl, celebrated my 18th birthday. My mom, stepsister, and stepdad all reside with me. Though she is just 15, my stepsister is the worst 15-year-old I have ever had the displeasure of meeting. She constantly tries to outdo me and is conceited and cruel. She's a terrible human being, which is why we despise one another and have always done. That's it. I was 3 years old when my dad went away, and I hardly remember him at all. However, I do remember a lot of arguments I had with my mom when I was younger, which led me to believe that things may have gone differently if my dad had been alive. When I reached 16, she got married to my stepdad, and they moved in together. However, they had been dating for 3 years before they were married and moved in together, since she had been with him since I was 1. My stepsister was a complete brat even before they got married. She was much harder to put up with once my stepdad moved in, since she was 10 times more obnoxious and would often instigate arguments with me. I repeatedly brought this up to my mother and even voiced my displeasure over her actions to her father, but they chose to ignore it, blaming it on typical sibling rivalry. They thought she would get over it, but I knew they wouldn't bother because my stepsister was the family's favorite for both of them. Since she was his biological daughter, my stepdad would naturally always stand by her, but even my mother would go over and above for her. She would never do that for me, so that stung a lot. My mother didn't like it at all when I discovered as a child that we were essentially different individuals. When I was younger, my mother wanted me to learn how to apply cosmetics at the age of 7, take care of my hair, and wear dresses rather than shorts. However, I was a bit tomboyish and preferred sports, video games, and vehicles. Though they weren't me, I'm not claiming there's anything wrong with those things. There were a lot of arguments between my mom and myself because I didn't feel like I could express myself authentically if I was always trying to please her. She constantly wanted me to be a little version of herself. Therefore, she would push me to do more feminine things when I didn't want to. She never acknowledged or even realized that I was a unique individual. She liked my stepsister right away since she was the type of kid she had always wanted. As a teenager, that truly devastated me since here I was, doing everything in my power to win my mother around to my true self. All of a sudden, this chick appears and grabs her from me. My mother became the mother I had always desired for my stepsister. Nothing made me feel more depressed than that. The fact that my mom was suddenly on her side was terrible enough, but my stepsister's haughty actions would make matters worse. I simply couldn't tolerate her. As soon as possible, I wanted to get off to college. On my 18th birthday, I was ecstatic since I had just graduated from high school and would soon be traveling to the college of my choosing. I play lacrosse, so I already had a sports scholarship secured, and I was planning to transfer in the autumn. I was thus prepared to leave this area behind. Since my 18th birthday would be my last to be celebrated at home with my mother, I anticipated a surprise from her. I expected some zeal from her because I would only be returning home for the holidays starting this year. But I suppose that since my stepsister came around, I had forgotten exactly how unwanted I was. I was foolish to have any expectations at all. Not only had my mother not done anything particularly for me, but she had also sat me down to a crucial conversation about the future in the afternoon when the house was empty. She informed me that, unlike me, my stepsister would not be receiving a sports scholarship when she entered college in a few years, since she was not a student athlete. She was also not eligible for an academic scholarship because of her grades, so she would have to pay the whole cost of tuition. My mother then threatened to take away my right to reside here unless I contributed to my stepsister's education fund. It was that final bit that stunned me. She said she and my stepdad decided they'd start saving up for my stepsister's college fund now to avoid any financial trouble in the future. When I asked her to repeat herself, they expected me to contribute as well because I was now an adult, or they wouldn't let me continue to live here. I had to contribute as a member of this home or I would have to move out. The fact that she was even making this demand astounded me. It goes without saying that I couldn't assist, and it was absurd to suggest that I would lose contact with them if I didn't support my awful stepsister. My mother sounded so serious about it that I could practically feel my stomach drop. I couldn't believe she was saying this. I told her I needed some time to think and left for my room since I didn't know what to say to her, and I most surely didn't want to argue with her. My stepdad is a physician, and my mom works as a nurse. They met since they both work at the same hospital. Although I'm not aware of their precise income, I'm confident that it's plenty for them to support my stepsister without requiring my assistance. The idea that she would even ask me to help seemed absurd. I might have even contemplated it if my stepsister and I had a wonderful connection with someone who doesn't even like me. I detested her, though, since she was a terrible person. Therefore, why in the world would I donate to her college fund? That was nonsensical. Additionally, I don't see how Mom expected me to give money when I would need it for myself. I was leaving for college in a few months. I would undoubtedly need that money for personal expenses, so it didn't seem fair to ask me to help out for my stepsister, even if, in the unlikely event that I did get a job there and began working to support myself. The fear of being booted out kept me from even saying nay. I was not interested in living on campus all year. I wanted to return for the holidays. I doubt that I could even gain permission to do it. It was horrifying to think that after I graduated from college, I would essentially be homeless. After giving this some thought, I decided that it wasn't fair to me and there was no way I could make this work. But I chose to speak with my grandparents rather than argue with my mother. I didn't want to compromise with my mother this time just to have my expectations ultimately unmet. To be honest, I didn't believe the disagreement would be worthwhile at all. She would never consider me, and she would only ever consider her favorite. I was essentially barred from speaking to my mom's parents, my grandparents. We hardly communicate with my dad's parents, who are out of state. She claimed that my grandparents needed no company and that I shouldn't bother them. I could only visit them with her never alone, and I could only speak with them about appropriate subjects. In my junior year, I went by their house without warning to spend some alone time with them. Mom had been crying when I informed her when I got back. I made the decision not to go see them alone any time soon since I didn't need that much turmoil. However, I enjoyed my stay there, and I didn't get the impression that they were particularly ill or frail. But up until this point, I had complied with my mother's guidelines for communicating with my grandparents out of a desire to avoid upsetting her. Still, I realized that day that if I wanted them to assist me in persuading my mother, I would have to go against the regulations and talk with them. It's likely that my mother could only be coerced into doing something by my grandparents. To save myself from being ejected this time, I truly needed them on my side. I was not going to work through college and acquire a job only to contribute to my awful stepsister's education money. In order to record my mother repeating the requirements she had set for me, I eventually made the decision to speak with her. Both my grandparents and I feel a deep love for each other. I felt it would be wise to make sure I had all the necessary evidence before approaching them, though, as I was asking for assistance to defend myself against their own daughter. I talked to my mother while the tape recorder was still on, urging her to be very specific about what she expected of me once I started college. She said the same thing twice. Thankfully, despite her seeming frustration, she didn't seem to be suspicious or give it much thought. I told her that I was going out with my friends and that I would let her know what I had decided when I got home. She didn't press too hard and let me go, but she seemed fine with it as well, because it was my birthday. I told my grandparents everything after that, going straight to their home a few blocks away. When I say everything, I mean everything. At first, my intention was to inform them about my mother's ridiculous demand and my expulsion from the house if I failed to comply. But before long, when I tried to explain my circumstances to them, I found myself sobbing and bursting with emotions. I suppose I wasn't coping with my mother's rejection of me as well as I would have liked to. They were astonished as I was telling them about the horrible treatment I had at home. I appeared somewhat content and at ease whenever I went there with my mother, but it was only a mask I had to wear. My mother felt that my grandparents were too elderly and unwell to be worrying about her or me. Since my grandparents appeared to be in excellent condition and were just in their early 60s, I must admit that I never got into that premise. I believed that my mother's fear that I would one day reveal the truth about her was the primary reason she didn't want me to interact with them or be in their presence. She was afraid her parents would discover that, in order to protect her stepdaughter, she had been abusing me, her own daughter. She would then be in serious trouble, and her parents would be quite angry with her. This is exactly what took place. My grandparents came for me for a bit after I told them everything, promising to mend things. My grandfather appeared incredibly irate, but I wasn't sure what they meant by it. As soon as I collected myself, they gave me a $100 cash and advised me to celebrate my 18th birthday by going out with my friends that evening. I felt much better when they assured me that they would put things right and that I wouldn't have anything to worry about when I returned. As a result, I chose to spend the day with a few of my friends because they had been pleading with me to do so. I must have stayed out late with my pals since I was finally enjoying my 18th birthday the way it should have been celebrated and didn't want to go home. My grandparents texted me at around 9, pleading with me to return to their house rather than go home. So that's precisely what I did. It was odd since, even at that point, I had not received any texts or phone calls from my mother. She would have been desperate to confront me about what I had told them that day if my grandparents had talked to her about it. Her sudden and eerie silence felt a little strange. At 10 o'clock, I returned to my grandparents' house, and after I showered, they sat me down and assured me that nothing was wrong and I didn't need to worry. They informed me that in order to give me ownership of the property, they had ordered my family to vacate the one they had been residing in. It seems that my parents received the house as a wedding present from their grandparents, and they have resided there ever since. However, they understood today that they had to take action after learning how my mother had been abusing me. They spoke with her and politely requested that she retract her remarks and treat me with more respect. However, she chose to act disrespectfully and tell my grandpa to mind his own business rather than owning up to her mistakes. She genuinely thought that I would no longer be welcome in her house if I didn't start working and supporting the family as an adult. My grandfather was enraged by that because of how unjust it was. He informed her that she had to leave the house, since it was still legally his after a very heated confrontation. He still had the authority to kick her out since he had never legally given her ownership of the property. She had two options, then: move out of the house or choose to be a better mother to me. There is no surprise that she chose the latter. She acted as though I wasn't a member of her family or connected to her by blood when she informed my grandfather that her current top priority was her own family and not me. If that's what he wanted, she would clear the house by the end of the week, she responded, cutting off the phone. That explains why my mother hadn't gotten back to me. My grandparents also clarified that her behavior with them over the previous few years, not just what I said to them today, was what caused them to take this extreme action. She had always felt that her husband and stepdaughter were the only family she would ever need after getting married. Every 2 months, she would travel to see her folks just once or twice. They would beg her to at least allow me to speak with them or pay them a visit, even if they had given up on getting her to come more frequently. She would constantly come up with an excuse for me saying I was too busy, even though I wasn't. She just refused to allow me to see my grandparents because she thought I would be honest with them. She had very cunningly used her power over us all to make sure we avoided each other out of self-interest. Now everything had come crashing down around her due of her lies and manipulation. forcing her to leave the home she had occupied for over 20 years. She picked my stepsister over me, which really irritated me. To my further anger and rage, though, was her real belief that this was all somehow justifiable. Not only had I lost faith that my mother would ever love me as much as she loved my stepsister, but I was also disheartened at the moment. I was beginning to see her for who she truly was. I stopped anticipating anything from her. At the time, I really kind of liked that I was staying the night at my grandparents' house, since I didn't want to see or talk to my mother. I detested her actions even more than the fact that I was her daughter. I moved in with my grandparents the next morning, staying with them until my mother and her family left, after returning home with my grandfather to gather some of my clothes and necessities. No one had left for work yet, even though it was already noon. My stepsister was home as well. They all appeared upset and dissatisfied, but I remained silent. I ignored them as I made my way to my room to get my belongings. My grandfather had escorted me inside and assisted with packing. However, after 10 minutes or so, my mother entered the room and insisted on having a face-to-face conversation with me. She persisted after I said no. At last, I gave in and allowed her to pull me away so we could have a conversation. She admitted to me that she had been lying to her dad over the phone, but that she really couldn't afford to leave at such short notice. She now required me to get this fixed by talking to Grandpa. After everything she'd done, I was shocked that she still thought it was okay to want something more from me. I therefore flatly and clearly told her no right in front of her. I informed her that after what she had done, she had no right to talk to me at all. She had to follow her decision since she had already made it. Then, when she asked me to contribute to my stepsister's education fund, she explained that she didn't really mean for me to be offended and that she was only trying to teach me how to be responsible. With tears in her eyes, she informed me that I would have realized my mom didn't mean what she said if I had only thought she was worth a discussion rather than running directly to my grandparents with my complaints. All she wanted to teach me was how to manage my finances responsibly. If I talked to my stepsister about my feelings even once, all the money I would send from her education fund would really go into a different account that she intended to let me have later. Then she came clean with me. Had I known better, I would have realized that she would never, ever throw me out, especially not for something as trivial as this. However, it seems that I would cause her to be ejected from her own house, which caused her great pain. She gave me the go-ahead to do as I pleased, but reminded me that she loved me and always wanted the best for me. I was speechless and unsure of how to respond. I haven't discussed this with anyone in the past 2 days. I'm not even sure if my mom was being sincere, but the guilt keeps getting worse. I am unable to discuss this with my friends or, most especially, with my family. I'm ready with replies, then. ATA for talking about my mother to my grandparents when she made threats to throw me out if I didn't contribute to my stepsister's education fund. First update. All right, let me start by saying thank you for all of the wonderful thoughts and suggestions. I did share what my mother had told me the other day with my grandparents. He was quite dubious about it, believing it implausible that my mother would have saved that cash for me and that she was only lying to take advantage of me once more, so that they might stay with me. Like my grandfather, I thought, although I was feeling a bit sad, my mom had not really changed overnight. Testing her was the only way to see if she was serious or not. I contacted her and told her I'd given it some thought, just in case she meant what she'd said the other day. However, I still think it would be better if my grandfather gave me the house right now. At first, she seemed a bit surprised and attempted to convince me that there was nothing to be concerned about. However, she turned nasty and began accusing me of not having faith in her when I persisted. I protested with her, telling her that after years of mistreatment, I couldn't just trust her. In the end, she lost her temper and yelled at me, ordering me to burn in hell, and that she never wanted a daughter like me. That only confirmed what I already knew. My mother was only acting kindly out of the blue to avoid being forced to give up her house, and my grandparents and I would provide her formal ownership of the home. Alas, it is unfortunate. That is no longer the case after she revealed her actual self to me. Forget about her, she can burn in hell. Does she not desire a daughter similar to mine? All right. I, for one, would never want a mother like her, thus she will no longer have me as a daughter. Second update. Now that the legal proceedings are concluded, the house is formally mine. Moving out is already underway for my mother. She had only had a week at first, but my grandparents and I were gracious enough to give her 1 extra week. She has about 4 days left to be gone now, in order for my grandparents to move in with me and take care of the house while I'm away at college. They also intend to sell the house they presently own. I'm excited to begin my new life and believe it's a great concept. Third update. Hey, so since things have finally started to work out for me, this will probably be my last update for a bit. My mother gave me the keys before she moved out today and sternly warned me that I would come to regret this. She was fortunate enough to locate an apartment near her job and school on short notice, so I don't see why she's so resentful. Even if it's a lot smaller location, she ought to learn gratitude. For example, I'm appreciative of my amazing grandparents and my friends who have shown me nothing but support ever since I told them about my struggles. I'm also grateful for all of you because, despite the fact that we are total strangers, everyone here treated me quite well, and I sincerely appreciate that. With a family who genuinely loves me now, I'm writing this on my old laptop in my old room in my old house. I'll be going away in a few months to attend the college of my choosing. I'm finally living the life I've always desired, and I could